along for our panel discussion this morning. I'm Chris Busby, and I head up permanent recruitment for our IT division here at MCS Group. I'm thrilled to be joined by three of our experts today in industry who are going to share their insights all around the future of work and ultimately how we can engage, how we can promote a better culture in the new world of work that we find ourselves in. I'm joined by Mark O'Connell, Sinead Heverin and Carl Webb. And before we get stuck into questions, guys, maybe would you like to introduce yourselves? Just give a brief synopsis.
Hi everyone, so my name is Mark O'Connell. I'm the site lead and VP of Architecture at Evercoat NI. So our product is essentially, I keep translating it for folks locally, is essentially go compare the market, those products that people would be familiar with in the local market. We do that for the US insurance market. And today we're one of the largest, if not the largest, online source of insurance policies in the US market, which of course, hopefully people know is a very large market, so we're very excited by the potential that we have, going into that market. So, in terms of my role in Belfast, I started last year in the middle of the pandemic, around about July. So scary time to be starting up a new company in Belfast, but obviously with the support of our partners in MCS and other recruitment agencies around Belfast. We've managed to build the team to around about 30 at the moment, so great year behind us and hopefully a few more to come and great stuff for the office in Belfast.
Thanks, Mark. My name is Sinead Heverin. I work for Puppet in Belfast. I'm a director of engineering and also site lead for the office there. For anybody who doesn't know Puppet, I guess the strapline is automate everything, but essentially what we do is we have a suite of products that effectively can run your infrastructure and monitor it and keep it safe and healthy and compliant. So that runs both in terms of on-prem for data centers, for big, large financial companies and banks, and then we can also then support you in the cloud as well. So we're headquartered out of Portland in Oregon, but a global company. All our top Fortune 500 companies, almost all of them, use Puppet to actually run their infrastructure. So anything from NASA to Walmart to some of the big financial banks like NatWest and HSBC, etc. So running a lot of kind of important businesses for people. From a site perspective, we've been here for 6 years and continuing to grow. So it's been fun.
Thanks, Sinead. My name is Carl Webb, and I work with the Careers, Employability and Skills Department at Queen's, University of Belfast. So I've been at Queen's for just over a year, so I actually joined during the pandemic, which was a strange place, and I know others have done it, but it's a very strange strange time to join an organisation. Essentially, our role within the Careers Department is to, I guess, equip students with the skills outside of their academic skills to be work ready. So it's an enjoyable role to be involved, and much of it is, from my perspective, around employer engagement. So very much I'm a link between our student base and the employers and industry. So hopefully I'll be giving a perspective today which will be a little bit different than maybe Mark's and Sinead's, but more from a student, coming graduate perspective, which might be a little bit different than experienced hires, for example.
Thank you, folks. So the first question I have for our panel today, and maybe geared towards more Mark and Sinead, how would you have described your culture pre-pandemic to now, and what have been the biggest changes you've noticed?
I'm almost embarrassed to admit now that I was very much an office 9-to-5er. I was, and I suppose it was pre-Evercoat for me. It was another company I was working for at the time, but very much I was all about getting into the office, working with people, collaborating, being in front of people. I wouldn't really have sent them an email. I would have went around to their desk and spoke to them, and kind of that's how I felt it was sort of most effective. So obviously all of that is taken away when it comes to the pandemic. You have to work out. I used to turn off Slack. Used to give me trauma when I heard the the sound of a new message coming in. But obviously, you've no choice. You have to embrace the asynchronous communication, the remote communication. So it's been a huge learning curve for me personally. But I think, obviously the pandemic has really accelerated, and I'm sure we've heard this 100 times already, but it's clear that it's accelerated the move towards a more flexible working model for people, and I think that's great. I'm dreading the days where I have to go back to, sitting on the M2 Hill section, waiting for half an hour for the traffic to clear before I can get into my first meeting, which I'm probably going to be half an hour late for. No, I think obviously that has brought about a lot of change. Like I say, very much in the office pre-pandemic, and now having had the year or 18 months, it's about trying to adapt and trying to figure out, I think, obviously we had a time where it was all completely remote, and we heard this morning, I was at the great talk that AFLAC gave this morning on the main stage there, and I think one of the things that really resonated for me when Keith mentioned it was a great leveler for someone like us who was setting up a remote office in Belfast, with the main corporate headquarters in Boston. Everybody working from home at that point, it didn't really matter where you were. You weren't sort of at a disadvantage because there were water cooler conversations happening, somewhere in Boston. Everybody was at home. So I think that really helped us when we sort of set up in Belfast. We made much deeper connections, I think, with our US colleagues than we might have otherwise. And now what we're trying to do is really see, well, how can we take the best of both worlds and really foster, not just because we hear about people being more productive at home, and I definitely feel that myself as well. It's when you used to come in and put the headphones on and sort of zone out, that obviously is provided by default at home, hopefully, for most people, most of the time. So it's really, for me, about trying to balance, that's the productivity side of it. It's trying to balance that with the creativity side of it as well, which I think is best fostered, when you're in front of people and face-to-face.
From a puppet perspective, I think we had a fairly open, flexible culture even before the pandemic, but it certainly has created new challenges and also new opportunities, I guess, as well. So because of the fact that we were a global company, we did have a distributed team nature. We did have to communicate through Slack, through Zoom meetings or whatever, and video calls. So we had that kind of factor already. I guess we had that muscle built already, which was great to be able to lean on. So I think whenever the pandemic did hit, we were able to shift to remote working relatively seamlessly. And I think initially there was definitely a lot of positivity about the fact that it could create a level playing field for people whenever we did have that global aspect to operationally how we ran our projects and delivered our software. But I think as time has gone on, there's also been, I guess, the awareness and the realization that we are missing a sweet spot. We're missing the collaboration piece, the social aspect of things, the team building. And I think there's no doubt about it, as our office has actually opened again, albeit with some restrictions, you do realize that you feed off each other and you do get a lot of energy. So the policy going forward is that we will be remote hybrid. So again, as Mark says, I think trying to find that sweet spot somewhere in the middle. I think people have realized being able to work from home does introduce a level of flexibility. From a diversity perspective, I think I have to speak as well. There's a huge opportunity for people who maybe didn't realize that the tech sector is somewhere that actually is offering a lot of flexibility, and you can maybe get a better work-life balance. So I think we're really trying to focus in on that in terms of the health and well-being of people going forward and try to get the best of both worlds. But certainly, as we go forward, we're also looking at things like our office space, and considering how we utilize that going forward. We don't really want the office to be somewhere where people wear their headphones and they're not talking to each other. It's actually, that's where the collaboration and hopefully some of the magics happens, and people can actually get that sense of fun. And, I guess, COVID has killed the crack a little bit. Sorry for the Northern Irish term, but it has to be said. And I think, that's an important thing, is we have to enjoy working with each other. We have to enjoy each other's company and kind of feed off each other in terms of that energy. So I think going forward, it will be very much a hybrid workspace, but maybe not the heads down in the office anymore, as opposed to more the, when we need to actually talk, when we need to design, when we need to innovate, some of those conversations are better together. Yeah.
Thanks, Sinead. So you're saying hybrid. Mark, Carl, I'd open up to you. Fully remote, hybrid, back to the office. What do you think? What do graduates want, Carl?
Well, I think largely it's dictated by the regulations and guidelines that are in place there. I think very much now students adapted very, very quickly. Regardless of how hard it was and how tough it was, they did adapt very quickly into a remote learning environment. But Sinead made a very good point. I mean, you can imagine sort of missing the office crack, but from a student's perspective, if you can recall that sort of stage of life, a long time ago for me, but you know, the social and the sort of the fun aspects of being a student, you know, to get that sort of just pulled from under you is difficult. And I think now that we have opened up campus again, there is very much a hybrid and a blended approach, you know, so on the whole, we're encouraging on campus, but obviously in large lecture environments or certain tutorial environments, then where the numbers restrict that, then we're into a hybrid model. So I think that'll the way it'll be forward. In terms of students, of how they've adapted to that, I think there is an expectation from students that, you know, the 9 to 5 in an office, that's probably gone, and for them sort of not knowing anything different, I think there's an expectation from them that, you know, they'll not probably move into that, a total sort of Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 sort of environment, or 8 to 6, whatever it may be, whatever sweat house you work in, you know, 7 to 9, I don't know.
Yeah, the one thing I would add to that, you know, I think there's obviously some, you know, the one side of the extreme is everybody back in the office, the other side is completely remote. And then we talk about this hybrid ground in the middle. I think what I've sort of learned in a wee bit of research for this talk actually was that it's probably, for us at least, it's probably better termed flexible. So, you know, by that we mean if there's employees who don't want to come into the office for a given month because their work suits being at home, then great, you know, take advantage of that, do that. But let's say we're in a phase where there's going to be a lot of creativity, design, collaboration needed, then maybe they actually want to be in the office for 2 weeks solid. So what we're going to try and go with is a 100% flexible model. And, you know, it sort of brings me back to like thinking about, well, really we need to trust our employees to say when it's going to be right for them to use one or the other. And it's a complete mindset shift. I remember several years ago, you know, some of the conversations that big companies would have been having was, can we trust our staff to work from home? You know, thankfully those days are gone, right? If you're employing somebody, you're trusting them, you're going to have to trust them. So, you know, and I think it's really going to be up to the individuals and the professionals that you're working with to make those calls. And I think it's important from a culture perspective to provide the office and to provide that home base for people to come in and have the crack. I do think it's very important. I think, is the crack our competitive advantage? It might well be, right, in the world markets. So I think that's really important to continue to foster that and the teamwork that sort of comes with that.
Thanks, Mark. That leads quite nicely on to the next question. What impact has the pandemic and actually working remotely had on your teams? And what have you done to support them ultimately?
Lots of things, and like even just coming here today, you can see lots of examples of where people have tried to continue to keep that human connection going, because it is so important. I'm going to quote from one of my favorite TV shows, ER. Keeping you safe is harder than keeping you happy sometimes. But I do think kind of safety has obviously been paramount. And in terms of being able to actually, you know, take that brave step and make the decision that the office will open up again, we've had to obviously live with some restrictions, and I think probably we all are. But I think trying to keep that connection going socially, I mean, it's probably being overzealous on Zoom, at least in the first instance, you know, with quizzes, with events that we've been able to kind of host and do online. But I think there's still been no substitute for being able to try to do a little bit of both. But certainly we've done things like online meditation sessions, we've done online yoga and exercise classes for people, and we've sent out sort of wellness gifts and things like that. We've tried to encourage a bit of challenge around trying to make sure that people are keeping active and keeping mobile as well, because the chair is killing us sometimes. So I think that's certainly one of the things I found very challenging, was even just I know we don't like the commute into work in the car possibly, or the bus, but being able to actually get up on your feet and walk and move, we haven't necessarily maybe been doing as much of that. So that's been really important too. So it's kind of been, I guess, really trying to get the balance right. And one of the other things that Puppet's done as well is actually introduced extra holidays. So all in, we got, I think, 4 extra holidays last year. We've additional 4 holidays this year. And I think it's been so welcomed that they're actually probably going to now increase the leave allocation as well. So it's been a whole mixture of things, some in person, some online.
Yeah, I think for me the main challenge has been, like, my own context in the last year has been trying to build the team out in Belfast. So trying to do that, you know, in a completely remote environment, which we were in and out of lockdown, obviously, throughout. I think it's been a real challenge to try and get the cohesiveness that you're looking for in a team. So how do you build team when everybody's at home and not able to, you know, be in person? And for me, I definitely found personally, I found the isolation quite difficult, because I definitely get energy from other people and work best with other people. So I'm indexed on that side. So, you know, for me to try and creatively think about how do we actually build this team unit remotely, all my ideas were like, oh, we could do this. Oh no, that's not going to be safe. Oh, we could do this, and that's not going to be safe. So I kept hitting roadblocks. Thankfully, Jenny has a lot more creativity than I do, and we were able to do lots of online events. And we were able to, you know, just, I suppose, keep it ticking over. I think when we really saw you know, the ability to get together in person again, I think we really started to see those team bonds coming in. And I remember one of the examples, actually, maybe a challenge to your initial question there, Chris, was there was a specific problem that we were trying to solve for weeks. You know, a sort of small group of us. And we kept saying, well, we'll go down this road or we'll go down this road, but there was always pros and cons, and we couldn't quite land on what we were looking to do. And it was whenever we were able to open up, coincided with going back into the office. And we booked a 2-hour slot, the sort of 3 or 4 people that were working on this. We booked a 2-hour slot for the meeting room when we come back into the office, and we thought, right, we'll flesh this out here, and hopefully we'll just keep this going, and eventually we'll get to the solution that we're looking for. And it was a penny drop moment for me, because we came in, and within 15 minutes in front of a whiteboard, again, Keith was talking earlier about the importance of a whiteboard, within 15 minutes we had a solution that everybody was happy with. But I think it was because we were able to bounce off each other face to face. You know, that's what we'd been missing on the Zoom calls, and, you know, the choppiness of the line, and go, oh, could you repeat that? Like, it just doesn't really suit the creativity that you need for some of those problem solutions, or problem solving, I should say. So, you know, I think that's where I'm saying productivity and creativity are 2 different things, and I think we definitely can be more productive at home, but for those moments where we need to be creative and we need to work with people, I'll hold my hands up and say I'm not very good at it remotely, at least on my own part. So.
Thank you. It probably leads quite nicely on, Carl. It was specifically for you in terms of mentoring and, you know, the style. Have you had to change your style, folks, in terms of how you've mentored specifically at people at the less experienced end or at the beginning of their careers? What have you found, Carl?
Yeah, I think you talked about the impact there on people, Chris, and, you know, the reality is the impact of the pandemic has been hugely different from one person to the next. And there was a study recently done with ACAS, and I think in tandem with Southampton University. And to cut a long story short, there was a massive variation in the impact to students. So we have to, you know, take into context geographic location, socioeconomic background, all these sorts of different things have an input into that. But the reality is someone's experience is very different than someone else's. So it is important from a hiring perspective and also just a management perspective to realise that, you know, we're dealing with individuals here, and each of them have had very different experiences through the last 18 months. In terms of, I suppose, some of the mechanisms for support, I guess there's a huge emphasis now on communication. You know, just communicating with teams, and in our case, communicating with students around the guidelines, around, you know, the different I guess, regulations that are in place and how they best equip themselves to deal with all of that. I mean, we've had huge, I suppose, development of our wellness support services within Queen's for students, and also it's been an acceleration a lot of for content going to digital format. I think now we're in an environment where content is on demand, so talking about a really significant impact for Queens and probably for all of us is that now that we're used to sort of watching content whenever we feel like it instead of when it's on and when it's broadcast, and that has transcended obviously into student environment. So they don't have to attend their lecture at 9 o'clock, or they didn't perhaps. They could tune in at 10 o'clock and watch it later on, and actually they could rewind a bit and sort of listen to that again. So there's been some really positive impacts regarding that, and I think as we move forward, the hybrid approach is going to probably benefit of some of those sorts of nuances that we've probably relied on. You touched on mentorship there, Chris, and I think that has been an important part of, I guess, supporting students, but also supporting interns, placement students, and graduates into new roles. So there's been a lot of focus for us in working with employers to develop mentorship programs and developing that whole sort of 360 support service for individuals. Now, I think that's going to be true for fresh graduates, but it's all probably true for actually experienced hires as well, you know, because again, you talked about it, Mark, you know, and I'm probably like yourself. I found it difficult to be on my own and being in isolation. So having someone to bounce off can mean a heck of a lot.
Do you think, guys, that hybrid and remote working can help tech companies better achieve diversity?
Yes, definitely.
Touched on that earlier, Sinead.
I think it's kind of you had me at hello with that one. Yeah, I'm also tempted to do this. Sorry, you're on mute. You know, that's like the quote of this year, of the last 18 months for all of us. Yes, definitely. I think kind of from a personal perspective, you know, I have a family. And you're trying to balance kind of, certainly homeschooling was a challenge, let's put it that way. It tested everybody's patience, I think, for anybody out there who's dealt with that. But I also think, I mean, you know, what you were saying about kind of everybody's experienced it in a different way. We're all kind of coming in with different concerns, different lenses, I guess, different responsibilities. But from a diversity perspective, I do think kind of we need to be careful that we don't go backwards, I guess, that we want to try to actually use the flexibility, as Mark talked about, maybe not the to accelerate kind of our diverse workforce. From my perspective, I think it's an essential offering that we need to be making to our staff from a retention perspective, but also from an attraction perspective. And we kind of need to actually probably get better at advertising the flexibility within the sector and even within our job specs that we put out there. And it's something that's very close to my heart in terms of trying to build that diversity within the workforce, because I think it's so essential. It's an amazing sector to work in. It's so vibrant. You know, there's a lot of creativity. There's a lot of opportunity to do good things with it as well. So I think the more that we can get that message around flexibility out there as well, and all of us, I guess, have a responsibility to be able to try to promote that messaging, not just as leaders, but also as individual contributors within our organisation. So we have some work to do, but definitely I feel it's a huge advantage that we need to take forward.
Yeah, Sinead, I couldn't agree more. You know, the flexibility that we have now hopefully suits lots more people with different circumstances than obviously the 9-to-5 model that we had before. I think the other thing I would maybe add on to it's not directly your question, Chris, but we're opening up the country as well. You know, I'm from Ballymena. I like to get that into every talk I give. But so it's not too far away, but obviously there's people further afield where, you know, previously the commute to Belfast would have been maybe 2.5 hours. So almost unfeasible, right? They couldn't really do it. Whereas now, if that's maybe only once or twice a week in some cases, or maybe even once a month, depending on what happens, then obviously you're opening up the rest of the country to be able to take advantage of the great roles that are normally centred in Belfast, right? So I think that's a great thing too, and a big win for us is obviously there's lots of roles to fill. Like just look out in that court out there, you know, everybody's trying to hire 100 people at the moment, so, you know, we need to open up the entire country to those opportunities.
That leads on, I suppose, guys, to all three of you. What, you know, in the new world that we find ourselves in, what are the opportunities for Northern Ireland, the technology community?
Well, I think it's huge. I think the sort of it opens up the potential pipeline for hiring. I think that certainly, and then with that the diversity of our workforce, then we can kind of tap into that. we still, I think, are located in a really nice place, and that we straddle multiple time zones. I think that continues to keep us very attractive. We have, really good quality universities that are producing highly skilled kind of workforce that we can tap into as well. So I think from my perspective, it puts us in a really strong position.
Yeah, I'd echo that. Thanks for complimenting the students that we're generating there as well, Sinead. So that's always a good plug. But I think the opportunity is huge. I mean, I think the opportunity is huge. We look at the context of the 10x economy and the strategy that we're developing around that. And I think now we've got an opportunity to embrace another demographic of slightly older people sort of in that student population. We're seeing that number grow, who are looking back and sort of reflecting on where they are in terms of the career, and now looking for an opportunity to reskill and redevelop skills in line with the skills demand in the marketplace there. So I think that will also open up kind of a more diverse workplace as well, of experienced hires coming into an organisation, as well as kind of what we call the traditional sort of younger graduates. So I think that's a huge opportunity to take advantage of.
Yeah, the thing I would add, and I'll agree with all those points almost entirely, but I'll play devil's advocate for a little moment. I do think actually there's potentially a challenge with that as well, in that so we've got lots of local consultancy companies who provide services into London, provide services into Birmingham and other parts, and I don't know I wonder if we're going to head towards a world where, instead of providing those services from those local consultancies, are those companies going to come and hire people in the Belfast market, right? So, is it going to be robbing Peter to pay Paul? There might be some of that, but I think overwhelmingly it's probably going to be a positive for Northern Ireland and bringing in lots more opportunities for individuals to take advantage of. But I think that's probably one to keep an eye on.
I think just probably following up on Mark's point, I think that's where that blended approach to working is so key, because the office, having that hub, having that base to come back to, I think is going to be really important. So I think trying to get that balance is, that's what kind of helps us, I think, to actually be more marketable as well, because we can actually offer the flexibility of both worlds. So.
Yeah, just on that point, I suppose, Mark, just extending from that, I think there's also, on the flip side, a huge opportunity to attract talent back to Northern Ireland as well, because when we look at sort of working in a remote environment, we could have an individual based in London who is working for a tech firm and can command the same sort of salary in Belfast, work remotely and have all the advantages that we offer in terms of a living space here in Northern Ireland, which is far superior to anywhere else. I'm sure you'll all agree. So, I think we can take this opportunity to attract talent back.
Do you think, guys, as leaders, that you need to consider specific job skill sets or job roles in terms of working remotely or even in that hybrid model? As an example, an operational role need to be more visible as opposed to someone who's a software engineer?
I am probably going to pass this one along, but I'll explain why first. I think we very much subscribe to the you build it, you run it, you own it. So we don't really separate out the engineering and the operations roles. So that's all sort of within the same team, and that's kind of how we're trying to build our teams. I think, if I'm thinking about can somebody support a system from home as opposed to an office, I think there's no difference between the two. In fact, I would say probably less distraction at home, so I reckon it probably would. But like I say, we're slightly different in our model, so I'll maybe pass along to Sinead or Carl for this one.
I think the key thing is the flexibility. I think most of the organisations that Puppet engage with, they traditionally would have had certainly their operations team, but I think the pandemic has challenged that so much. And the advancement in technology and how we actually engage as human beings to kind of manage and support our business, it's just changed so much. So I think that one is I think it's a bit of a to be confirmed. I think it's still an evolving picture, because the reality is, we're still not out of the pandemic, we're still not out of restrictions, but I would like to think that holistically all of the industry could actually work towards a more flexible model.
I'll maybe put again, Mark, Sinead, on you guys on the spot, but let's hypothetically say your best engineer came to you and says, I want to go fully remote. What would you do? What would you say?
Well, the first thing I would say, Chris, is that we love all of our engineers equally. So they're all the best engineers whenever we're chatting to them. We're already at the point where we would say yes, regardless of role, regardless of, if it suits you better. And, again, it's back to the trust. We're trusting the professionals that we've hired to make those calls and to say this is going to be right for you as an individual, but right for Evercoat as a company. The answer is already yes, and if this is being recorded and somebody wants to use this, that's fine too.
Yeah, I think I would probably, what Mark said. Yeah, I think it has to be a yes, and I do think we're seeing that across the industry. I think the balance but needs to be had to make sure that we're still supporting, less experienced staff coming in, like our interns, like our grads, that we're still supporting them in the right way and making sure that they don't lose out as a result of not having that side-by-side conversation. But from a development perspective, the tooling is out there, the technology's there to be able to still pair program, still jump on calls. So I think it does require a little bit more of an effort, I think, sometimes, to embrace the technology and go with it. And it isn't as natural as being able to swing the chair around, let's face it. But I do think, the answer has to be yes.
Carl, would it be a different reaction from you if it was a graduate maybe or someone at the beginning of their career?
I think Sinead touched on it perfectly there in terms of I think it really does depend on the mechanisms that are in place to support, a graduate coming into an organisation or an intern coming into an organisation. It's one thing to say that you can offer a virtual internship. It's another thing to actually deliver that and give them the experience that's actually going to be rewarding and fulfilling for them. So, we would work sort of closely with an employer to kind of say, have you put the measures in place? How is this person going to be supported through the next number of months or years, whatever it may be? And if those mechanics are in place, then it works well. But I think the reality is that it does depend on the organisation.
I think if I could add briefly, Chris, that thinking about graduates coming and joining a company, I'm going back not too many years to when I graduated and joined one of the local engineering firms. The first few years that I had with in-person mentorship with, a really great professional who I still hold in very high esteem today and keep in contact with, those were really key defining, I think, years for my career and really set me on a journey, I think. And, to think now coming out as a graduate and having to try and do that remotely and, maybe with a day or two in the office, it's really about trying to capitalize on those moments and try and get the right balance there. I think I would worry, that we need to make sure that we support our graduates and internships, especially in those first few years, because those are foundational years, and we really need to double down on that and make that work. So.
I know, guys, we've kind of sort of touched on a few of these points, but I suppose to summarise, what do you think are the biggest challenges facing the tech community at NI and the world we find ourselves in today?
I think staying competitive, particularly in this remote world, we touched on that earlier, is definitely going to be key. But I think we need to look at ourselves and look at how we are culturally within this region. We kind of talked about the crack earlier. We're still a very kind of strongly influenced humour and kind of people orientated, I think, culture. We enjoy each other's company. I think the majority of people will say, yes, cutting out the commute is probably the thing that people like a lot about the remote working, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they don't miss the collaboration piece and the social element of kind of getting together with people and teams. So I think for me, offering kind of the ability to be flexible and try to encourage that diverse workforce to continue to build and continue to kind of advertise a sector that's fun, engaging, challenging, and from a comp perspective is a very healthy industry that we need to continue to endorse and to foster as much as possible.
Yeah, I think those are great points, Sinead. I think one of the other things that we're all probably feeling, if we're in roles where we're trying to find people, it's been a hugely competitive market for the last number of years, I think. And a point that Carl made there as well, we lose so many of our talented graduates to England or Scotland or further afield even. So first of all, how do we stop that bleed, right? So hopefully the opportunities that we have here, the competitive salaries that we now have, and the really exciting companies and roles that we have will go some way to do that. But, you know, we're still seeing people even not getting university places and going to Scotland for that, and then the likelihood is they might stay over there for a career. So how do we, you know, place strategic pitchers of Ulster fries in the right spot to get them back to Belfast, right? And how do we start to get those folks back that we've lost at the university stage? Somebody probably has a more accurate figure than me, but I recently was chatting with some folks in the council, and I think year on year we have a deficit of about 1,200 jobs that we're not filling every year. And I think at the moment we're obviously competing and we're trying to make the best of that. But at some point we're going to be letting investors down somewhere, and they're going to say, well, it would be great to come to Belfast, but we can't find the people. So I think that is the number one challenge that we need to solve, and I'm sure Carl has the solution here already in terms of just finding us 1,200 more graduates, right, to come out and fill those positions.
Yeah, cloning machine, I think, is what we need for that. But I think it's a great point. I mean, the reality is the skills, the demand for skills and the skills shortage is going to be the greatest challenge. And I think, you know, out of that, there's multiple strategies, I suppose, to equip ourselves to deal with that. But creating a culture, I think, in Northern Ireland of lifelong learning, I think, is really critical. And I know it's part of the 10X strategy. And I think we really need to look at that sort of as a society and as a culture to shift that. I mean, it's apart from our sort of graduates now, they should be thinking about how to increase their learning and their qualifications and accreditations as they move through their career. And likewise, we need to probably look at our more experienced people and say that they need to look at sort of how they can step back into it. So there needs to be incentives in place and sort of I suppose an infrastructure in place to allow that and facilitate that. But I think, you know, yes, you know, stopping the bleed of talent leaving, but also then increasing our existing talent and developing our existing talent is kind of the, you know, part of the solution, Chris, shall we say.
Thanks very much. Sorry.
On that, I mean, I think we touched on it earlier, but on the AFLAC presentation earlier talked about the Assured Skills program, but that's certainly an area I think that we need to probably develop more, is looking to other sectors that possibly are maybe in decline a little bit more, and looking at an opportunity to diversify and change people who are coming in with different life experience, but actually that's another way to get the diversity piece into our workforce. They're coming in with different life experiences that can actually shape an organisation in a totally different direction. So if we can do more in that space, I think as well, that's a bit of I think an opportunity area for us.
I think just that's a great point, Sinead. I think we are starting to see, you know, obviously an increased number of, for example, postgraduate cert programs running in those areas which are high skill demand, and we're getting sort of a great pollination of, suppose, industry sectors coming into those courses. But we're actually finding as well that the employers' feedback on those graduates or those people who have come through those courses is really positive, you know, so they're coming in with a slightly different, I suppose, mindset, approach, level of maturity perhaps in certain areas of life. So yeah, I think it's a big part of our next step.
Well, my panel will be pleased that I'm out of questions. So once again, thanks very much, guys, for sharing your insights. Some really, really good points raised there. And thanks again for everyone turning up. Great to see people in real life. Thank you.